Hi, I'm Richard Tucker for debaffle.net. In this video, I'm going to cover the components of a small business IT network. Now, it's a fundamentals overview. I don't go into detail. That's other videos that I'm producing. But this video will be suitable for anyone who wants to get an appreciation of what they should be considering if they're managing an IT network, but not necessarily doing the work themselves. So, for example, perhaps they're using outsourced IT providers. The things I'm going to cover are wide area network connectivity, using the internet, using a private network, local area connectivity, both wireless and wired. I'm also going to cover some considerations about what sort of services you use and whether you host those locally or through an external service provider. Things such as email, document management, telephone systems, and also your web hosting. I'll also finish up on some quick thoughts about identity management. I hope you like the video. Let's go. So to start off, I've got a diagram here showing two business offices, one in London, one in New York. Clearly they could be any location. You could also only have one office, but the concepts still apply whether you've got one or two. I've also got a service provider here offering all sorts of IT services, which I'll go through in a minute. And then I've got some traveling workers, some IT support. This IT support is if you don't have your own resources in-house and you're using external resources, and then I've got some customers. In the middle here, I've got the internet, which we're all familiar with, which allows us to get connectivity between various physical locations. I've also got the private network here, which isn't as common for small businesses, but it enables connectivity between offices, but with guaranteed throughput. That's not possible with the internet. It's a public network, and the reliability just doesn't compare to private networks, but private networks are more expensive. So the first thing I'll do is I'll connect our office to the internet, and that's going to be done via a router. It effectively looks the same as the box that you get from your internet service provider or cable provider when you're getting broadband at home. Now, if I've got a second office, I'll also connect that with a router. Now, I may want connectivity between these two offices for sharing resources such as printing, or I might be sharing documents, which I'll get to in a minute. Or I might be wanting to have my telephone network so I can just do transfer calls easily within the network. Now, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to want to establish something called a VPN. That VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and it enables a private network to be established over the public internet such that data that I send between these two sites is secure. Now, that's a feature of routers, and if you want to be able to get a VPN between two sites, it gets configured on the router side. Now, the next thing that I'm going to want to do, I've got my two offices connected, and if I only had one office, I'm going to want to do this next step regardless, is I need to have some form of connectivity within my office to enable my computers and my telephone. And then in this case, I'm showing a wired connectivity. This wired connectivity is just a cable that goes through walls or ceilings, but gets presented with a socket so I can actually plug in. I can get connectivity out to the internet. Now, we can also have wireless connectivity, but if I've got an access point, and that's what the wireless connectivity is provided from, typically they're up on the ceiling to get the best connectivity within an office location. That also needs to be cabled to the router. Now, many routers have built-in Wi-Fi, and you can attempt to use that to provide wireless coverage, but as soon as you go to a second floor, that wireless coverage is going to be not so reliable. So you will need some form of access points if you need to do large wireless coverage. And in this case, that access point gets cabled back. This cabling is best done by professionals. There's all sorts of standards to keep to so that you get good connectivity within an office. So this is our local area network. We've done wired and wireless. This is our wide area network using the internet, and we've used a virtual private network to make that private. Now, of course, we could have gone and paid a little bit more money and used this private network connection, and it would have established a reliable connection between these two sites without the need for a virtual private network. So there's our basic network connectivity to start off, and I'll just complete that here in the office with wired connectivity up to an access point for also providing some wireless. This wireless is providing here. Now, one last thing, our printer, we want to put that onto the network as well. That way, in the same location, this printer can be shared by computers, that are connected to that network. And if I connect at a second location, I can even share that printing across the network, say from this computer to that printer there. Now we've done our network side, let's talk about some of the key services that every small business is going to be interested in. I'm just going to pick what I think are the main ones. We're going to have email, we're going to have some form of document storage and sharing. We're going to have a phone system, and lastly we're going to want a website, some form of web presence. Now what I've done here is I've shown this this box. That's actually an equipment rack. Inside of this equipment rack are computers, but the computers, they're a lot more, they've got a lot more capacity to take more connections of multiple users, and they're computers that are used to being left on 24 hours, 7 days a week. We give them a special name called servers. Those servers are in this equipment rack. Often that's in a closet somewhere in a building, and I've got a couple of choices. I can host these types of services on site on my own computers, my servers, or I could go and get these from a service provider. Now, there's a few choices, a few things to consider as to whether I host these myself or get a service provider to use those. I'm going to go through those in detail in future videos, but I'll just give one example. If I've got document storage on site, and if these are very large documents, such as video files, or perhaps they're computer aided design files that are used in, say, architectural firms, if those are very large documents, it's much easier to access and download those documents if they're stored locally, because networks that are local area networks and even wide area networks are often much larger capacity than if we're going out to a service provider across the internet. Now clearly if I've got a VPN going over the internet, I'm going to have those slow capacity constraints. But if I've got a document server that's local to a site, these computers are going to get much faster access and download large files and be able to use them more snappily if that document server is local than if it's remote. That said, for email, I don't really have those same constraints, and it may well be that a service provider is a great solution for that. Now, with the service provider, there's a couple of key things that need to be considered, and that is disaster recovery and backup. Disaster recovery and backup. Now, ideally, if you are getting from a service provider, they're looking after both these two elements. Now, I'll describe what those are. Disaster recovery is so that if I lose my site, in this case, if I lost my London office and I was hosting all these sites in London, all of a sudden these services are no longer available. So let's say New York was using these services. New York is now without, because they were connected over the network, and now without email, their documents, their phone systems down, and their websites down for their customers. That's not a great scenario. So if I was going to have a disaster recovery solution, I would actually need to be running those same services at a secondary site. Now, our service providers, well, I've shown this in one equipment rack. Often they have that replicated already, and it's one of the key advantages that they can do, especially if you don't have two sites or if you don't want to run disaster recovery, that this is something you get an IT service provider to do for you on your premise, but you would still need to make sure that's done and have some form of strategy. Now that's disaster recovery. Backup is rarely around, and it's separate to disaster recovery. If I want a document that was from, say, 1 month ago, because let's say that document's become corrupted and the last known good version is a month ago, regardless of disaster recovery that says that document's available on both sites, I actually want a copy of that document in the past. So that's where I go to my backups, which are kept on a separate system, and inside of that backup I can get a restore of that backup in a past point in time, and get that to replace the corrupted version that I might have now. So that's they're my services, the options between keeping those local, doing disaster recovery myself, or perhaps using a service provider and making sure that they do that disaster recovery and backup if I'm not going to do it. Now, moving on to the last few things, if I've got traveling workers, I want them to be able to access services if I'm hosting them back into my office. And again, the VPN is the way that we do that. If they've got their own broadband connection or a wireless connection from a mobile carrier, the VPN provides a secure way to connect back into the office to use services that are hosted locally. And of course, there's other options if I've got via the internet to connect to services that might be at my service provider. So classics for document management, perhaps a Dropbox. For email, most ISPs, internet service providers, provide hosted email plans. And your website, that could also be hosted via a service provider rather than on-site. And similar for phone systems, companies such as RingCentral provide hosted telephone systems. Now, IT support, the reason why I put IT support on there is if you are managing a whole lot of equipment locally on your site, you do want some form, and again, that would be done via a VPN, some form of connectivity for IT support to monitor and manage this equipment proactively so that any issues are resolved before they affect users, and also reactively so there's a user problem. They can actually come in and support your equipment, support your users in a timely manner. Now, the very last thing that I want to conclude with is one other service that often gets forgotten, is identity management. Now, identity management is so that when a user logs onto their computer, how do you know that they're authorized to log on? And once they've logged on, what can they get access to? So for example, on the document management system, can they get access to HR files, or can they get access to financial files? Now, that form of managing identities and permissions and access is via an identity management system. In a typical small business, this isn't actively managed in a central way. The computer logon will be separate to the document management permissions, will be separate to the phone system telephone number that gets assigned. Now, that's fine when you've got a small business of, say, less than 10 users. As soon as you get above 10 users, you do need some form of system to manage identities. And you can see that I actually put that identity system up in the service provider, because there are systems that allow you to link whether you've got service provider provided services or whether you're running those on-premise. There are systems that let you link those all together so that you can have one identity across those two types of service provision methods and manage your users in a secure way. I hope you enjoyed that video on the components of a small business IT network. If you're interested in any of the detail, please see our other videos and also our training courses. We're releasing content all the time, so please do subscribe also. Thank you.